Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Careless comment.
Hello and welcome to the Mark and Pete Show. Jacob Rees-Mogg has been heavily criticised for saying it would have been common sense to flee the Grenfell Tower fire, thus ignoring Fire Brigade advice. Now, the leader of the House of Commons was appearing on a radio phone-in show and was discussing the findings of a Grenfell inquiry report when he made these alleged comments. The point being is that the Grenfell United group called the MP's comments insulting. Now, Mr. Rees-Mogg has already said that he profoundly apologised. Should he have actually apologised? And many people think that perhaps his comments were taken out of context. But nevertheless, when you're on a sensitive subject, perhaps it's best to think again on reflection. A careless comment that's callous and curt can cause a community to feel much hurt. Therefore, a more considered thought with time to reflect will uphold your integrity and earn respect. So, Clergyman Pete, do you think that some of the people who have criticised Rees-Mogg were right, or do you have a bit of sympathy for our little friend Jacob?
Callous, careless comment. Yeah, I like the alliteration. Very good. Now, the comment that he made, Jacob Rees-Mogg, you correctly identify what he said. You refer to it as an alleged comment. Legally, that's probably the right thing to say. But he did say it. I heard him live on the radio saying it. And his comments, I think he misspoke. He intended to say, and if you take the entirety of what he was saying, it was quite clear what he was saying. He was actually saying the opposite of what it appears. So just dealing with that first, he said, you and I, he said, talking to the interviewer, would have left the building even if instructed to remain in the building, not remain in Europe, that's a separate issue, remain in the building by the Fire Brigade, by the authorities. But what he was really trying to say is this, when he was referring to common sense, he said it was common sense to leave the building. They were told to stay in the building, and so by you and I, it's his common phraseology that he uses to refer to everyone, you and I. He talks to the person with him, but he means that's what people generally would do, is his meaning when he says it. So he says, you and I would not listen to what the fire service is saying. But his meaning was, and it became obvious as he goes on about it, what he means is that that's what we would do now. We've been put off from listening to the authorities because they gave such bad advice on that occasion. And he was actually addressing the issue of the advice. That's what he was talking about, not the residents in the house, of the tower. Now, you'd have to really be searching for something to be offended by to find that offensive. It's not that it was obviously, it wasn't just simply that it was taken out of context. He said it the wrong way round. He said that bit first, and he should have come after his other comments. But it was the way he was thinking. He was thinking it through. The question was put to him on a live radio show. So, then are you asking me, should he have apologised? And there are two answers to that. He had nothing to apologise for. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was making a very serious point, which was actually defending the actions of the people who sadly died, saying that it was quite reasonable, and saying they were given bad advice. That was his point. But even then, he was saying, well, the issue that we have is that now we may not take advice in future, so it has ramifications. Now, as part of a political campaign, however, you do have to make a judgment of what's going to give the least negative effect. And I think issuing a swift apology was the best way to deal with it. So strategically, I think it was right to apologise quickly.
Well, it also comes back to a broader point, because as we all know, we're in campaign mode, folks. Yes, listeners from around the world, the United Kingdom is going through a general election campaign, and it's set for the 12th of December, folks. But more importantly, when political representatives, and we'll say that Jacob Rees-Mogg is one of those for the Conservative Party, he found himself in what I would describe as an ignominious position, in the sense that a subject was brought up that's highly sensitive. Now, we could say that let's just conclude this Jacob Rees-Mogg situation, because we're going to talk about much wider issues when certainly eminent people talk about sensitive subjects, about do they comment or do they not comment? And it was clearly that, as you quite rightly point out, Clergyman Pete, there are situations where you're starting to go down a certain track and then find yourself in a position of attack when certain people will probably be looking for something. And there is a statement that was made by the survivors group of Grenfell United, said the leader of the House of Commons, effectively Jacob Rees-Mogg, suggesting that the 72 people who lost their lives at Grenfell lacked common sense is beyond disrespectful. And they went on to say it's extremely painful and insulting to bereaved families. The point, I think, here is we can talk about the semantics of the words that he used, but perhaps we should ask the bigger question is, should he have been even talking about the subject? Would it have been better for him to say, I'm not prepared on that subject, or I don't have enough information, and just simply moved on? I just want to conclude on this thing, and with the Jacob Rees-Mogg situation, should he maybe have just backed off and closed down the subject? What's your thoughts?
Well, you can speak to this from, no doubt you've had to speak on sensitive issues in your business career.
Yes.
Now, in my public role, apart from here on the radio show, where I'm paid to make comments and have opinions, so I can't really hold back too much. But in my other job, my part-time job as a vicar, I'm expected to be sensitive. It's similar in a way as the role of a politician in an election, in that I'm always in that position that people are going to listen to what I say as if it comes from a person either in authority or from an organisation that they love or from an organisation that they hate. So it's heightened, what I say will be heightened.
Yes.
And so certain issues I've learned to steer clear of. And when there is a problem such that something I've said on the show, which has been shared on social media, gets shared locally, it can cause issues. Because people are saying, is it taken from me as vicar, not me as political pundit? So, so I think what we have here with Jacob Rees-Mogg is he's in the radio show. He has hosted shows on that same radio station.
Oh, yeah.
He was behaving as a pundit when he should have been behaving as a minister and as someone in an election. So I would say he should not have not commented, but he should have said something like, well, this is such a sensitive issue. And obviously we grieve with the families who have suffered in that way. I don't want to comment any further. I think that's what he should have said.
And I completely agree. So the point here is that when you are on a political platform, or if you, as you say, you're a spokesperson from a particular group, in his particular case, obviously a political party, you have to decide when to comment and when not to comment. Now, ultimately, you have to make a statement in the sense, as you have said, that perhaps if the subject was too sensitive, and maybe he felt that he wasn't prepared. He, I think, for most people listening to the show, probably would have not picked up on many of the things that he said, and he would have just simply got washed over the airways and nobody would have even thought about it. But bearing in mind the subject, and bearing in mind how critical this particular subject is, which is still ongoing, because as we know, that lives are still affected and many issues still need to be resolved there. The report is still being looked at. I think he should have backed off, and I think that would have been the obvious thing. But when we look at it on a wider scale then, what are the subjects then do politicians now have to think carefully about going into a campaign where most people want their opinions about how they will address issues? So can you think of any other issues that perhaps politicians might steer clear of?
Well, in that, just briefly harking back to the Jacob Rees-Mogg situation, the reason it was heightened even further, the reaction to his comments, was the idea that it was racist. And in here, racism is standing in for it being, I suppose, classist. He's seen as upper class,
and that has been
class.
an accusation.
And that tends to be generally fitted in with race. So why? I don't know. I don't see it myself, but it was seen as racist. So race is one of them. Race is something you really need to be very careful about. And also, after the Me Too movement had such an impact, and had such a positive impact, actually, in highlighting the behaviour of some people, usually men, but certainly by no means always men, who take advantage of positions of authority and power within an organisation to have sexual relationships when they're not wanted. And so using their influence and power to gratify themselves when the feelings are not reciprocated. Now, the Me Too movement has, I think, gone off the rails a bit, and that it stayed on the rails and gone too far. But this means that as soon as you're talking about anything like sexual assault or rape, you've got to be very careful about what you say. I mean, I think you should always have been, but especially now, because this behaviour within companies and in politics has been highlighted recently. Your whatever you say, if it's not completely on the side of the victim, you're going to be jumped upon.
Mm. Well,
so the only way not to be is to not comment on it. The advice that you gave earlier, but sometimes you have to. So I think that it's very difficult. The incident I was thinking about was Nick Conrad, who was a Conservative candidate in this election. I say was because he stood down because I think it was 15 years ago a comment he made on a radio show that women should keep their knickers on to avoid sexual assault. Now, I'm laughing because that sounds like a ridiculously sexist thing to say. But he said it in the context of a particular incident in which a woman had been naked in bed with a man.
Yeah.
And then the sexual activity had started, and then she decided she didn't want to do it anymore, which is her right. And he never questioned that. But he did just general advice. If you don't want to have men having sex with you against, and you might change your mind, keep your knickers on and don't get into bed naked with them. That's what he was saying. Obviously, I'm not making a comment.
No.
For the reasons I've just said. I'm saying nothing.
No, but I would like to say something, and that is this now really saying that essentially public figures are walking a tightrope in the sense of metaphorical tightrope, that wherever they are treading a line, that if they slightly deviate from a particular position,
sure,
it becomes almost something that could come back to haunt them. And as you quite rightly pointed out, in any given case, time actually has no sense of healing, in the sense that if something was said 10 years ago, it could still be used against you. Yeah. Similarly again, albeit that, and I think it was reasonable to say, as Rees-Mogg in his particular case has openly apologised, because he has made clear that it wasn't what he wanted to say, and he's trying to correct himself. But in the course of a live conversation, which is broadcast across the nation, or certainly London and the nation, it suddenly becomes amplified. And we're in a world where the worrying part for me, and this is the counter to it, is I'm now at a position where I'm not entirely sure what the person is trying to say, because if they are so prescriptive and they can only read out statements, that doesn't give me a sense of what the person's thinking. No. And in a debate, and particularly in a live debate, whether it be a radio show or a chat show or anything like that, where are we giving politicians in particular a bit more license to be able to express themselves, whilst at the same time accepting that we have to scrutinise their comments?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying. We talked about this subject a bit off air, and we were batting back and forth the different responses that you could have. My thoughts on it are, having had to have this sort of public persona, public image, in a much smaller way, not on a national scale, on a very local scale, local to my parish. But having been through that experience, I would say that you can. There were two ways you can go. Either you steer clear of the subject or don't comment on the subject, if you know They're not going to listen to you. They're going to hear what they want to hear, or whatever their prejudices are about you, whatever you do. Or because that is the case, you can make the opposite. You can say, "Oh, well, I know that's what they're going to think, so I'm going to either play up to it or use it as my jumping off point." So, for example, taking this Nick Conrad, he could have said, to take it as his starting off point, the people who were accusing him, these people are saying that it's good for people to take their knickers off and to get in bed with strangers. I say, no, that's not. He could have started, if he wanted to make it a campaigning point. The best thing is to say nothing. But I don't think he should have been told to stand down. I think just with a little bit of support, he could have got through it. But anyway, that's the way that they went with it. The Jacob Rees-Mogg incident that we mentioned earlier, he could have said, well, in response to that, he could have made it a selling point and gone and visited with the people and said, look, this is what I'm saying, and made it very clear that he was saying the opposite, but uses as an opportunity to show his empathy for the people, using their side. He could have done that, but of course then that takes away from other issues. So, as I say, I think he made the right judgment. But all this advice that we're giving, I think, does apply to everyone in public life, apart from one person. And which is remarkable, but it seems to be the case that it doesn't apply to Donald Trump.
Well, this is extraordinary, isn't it? Because on the one hand, that we're talking about politicians who have been almost vilified in the press and in the media and in the public, such as Jacob Rees-Mogg and many others, of course, and we're not just picking on him. But you're right. How is it that a man such as one of the world's most powerful leaders can say almost anything on social media and even indeed public at special presentations and political addresses, and yet still
he said
the support of many of the public.
When he was attempting to become the candidate during the primary campaign, he said, such was his vision, that I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot someone with a pistol, and that you would still love me, or something like that. And that was, of course, taken to mean that he intended to shoot someone by some people. None of it mattered. Because he was correct. Yes. But I think the thing is, the difference with him, with Donald Trump, is that he is not really Donald Trump. He's Trump with a capital T. I mean, and in gold lettering. He is a character that he's created for himself. He's been so imprinted on the American consciousness, not so much over here in Britain. We know who he is, and we certainly do now. But before he became president, people would have known who he was, and they might have remembered his divorce, and he wouldn't really be such a big figure. But in America, he's so imprinted himself on people's consciousness. He's used as a metaphor for being rich, brash, and successful in numerous rap songs. He's part of the culture, part of the zeitgeist. And so when he says these outrageous things, it's not him saying them, it's this character saying them. And it's just absorbed into that. And it's sometimes put another way, that he will say insulting, insensitive, and frankly stupid and ridiculous things is baked in. It's all, you've already accepted that he's going to do that, and you don't mind. So if he says more of them, it doesn't make any difference. That seems to be the case. Is there something that he could say? I don't know. He hasn't said it yet, and he said lots of ridiculous things. So I don't know. I can't comment on that. But it does. At the moment, I would say it applies to everyone except Donald Trump.
Well, yes, indeed. Well, what do you think? Careless commentary, that is something which I'm sure that we'll see unfold over the days and weeks to come, particularly in the United Kingdom. But, of course, as Donald Trump, we know that he's got a campaign coming up next year in 2020, and I'm sure that we'll enjoy every little word that he says. Well, do you think that in the incident of Jacob Rees-Mogg, that perhaps, listeners, you have a bit of sympathy for him? Why not let us know? log on to markandpete.com and let us know your thoughts. Well, I know that we're really keen to sort of see what Jacob says in the forthcoming days and weeks. We also want to hear from you. And Donald, if you're out there, please let us know your thoughts. Well, join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark.